Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nicolas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5Dimes and Countermove, your home for fantasy MMA. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nicolas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 67 event, which takes place in Guyana, Brazil. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 4 total bouts. Briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC 187 went 0-2 to lose 4 units overall. We lost our underdog bets on Anthony Johnson and Josh Berkman, and we had no free bets available. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 67 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass and Fox Sports 1 this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Alright, now kicking off the fight card on Fight Pass is a welterweight contest between Luiz Dutra, who is 11-3, and Tom Breese, who is 7-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Breeze minus 135, the comeback on Dutra minus 105, and right now looking over at the line at 5Dimes, it is actually Breeze that got bet up. He's minus 150, and the comeback on Dutra is plus 110. Now, all lines are courtesy of our sponsor, 5dimes.eu, so make sure you guys check those out. And all lines are relatively fresh. Just only a few books thus far have copied, so the line margins will get tighter, and I'm sure we'll see more movement because of action coming in as well, so keep that in mind. But getting right into this fight, Breeze and Dutra, Dutra, I guess starting off with him a little bit, he's a well-rounded mixed martial artist. He's been around for a long time, 33 years old. He's a tough Brazil 2 vet. He actually won his elimination round fight by sub and then was actually injured, so he couldn't continue to compete in the season there. But getting into his style, really, like I said, he's pretty much well-rounded. He's a strong, aggressive fighter, has some power on the feet, good wrestling, decent takedown game. He's got solid BJJ to go along with it. So he really, offensively, he's a pretty talented guy, and you got to be cautious with him because he can finish you on the feet, he can finish you on the ground, he can control the tempo of the fight. But he does have some flaws in his defense. He's got some flaws in his conditioning as well. So Dutra is definitely a guy that you could, sneak in here and beat because he's just not, even though he's solid in every area, he's just not fantastic. He doesn't excel in anything particular. He's just a good all-around solid fighter. Now, Breeze, on the other hand, he's the one that has all the hype coming into this fight. Dutra is considered kind of the old man here. Breeze, he's a young man. He's 23 years old. He's a really highly touted prospect. He's training out of TriStar now. He's originally from the UK, but he has recently made the move to TriStar to get some training with those guys, which is going to only excel his career and help him greatly. So I think it was a really good move for him. But he's more of a BJJ grappling stylist. He's a very long, rangy fighter. His striking is really not his best attribute. It's solid, but not great. He shows some decent technique, and I'm sure it's going to improve from what I've seen on footage as well, especially training with the TriStar crew and just fight by fight, progressing in his career. I'm sure he's going to get better. What impresses me about him the most, he utilizes his knees and elbows well on the feet, but his ground game is what really stands out to me. He excels on the ground. His wrestling is not great, but he manages to get the fight down more times than not. And once he's on the ground, if he's on top, he's got really good ground and pound. Of course, he's got really good submission skill to go along with it. 6 of his 7 victories have been by sub, so the guy's dangerous on the ground. Now, I don't think it's going to be easy for him to get Dutra on the ground, though. And I think standing up, Dutra actually has the advantage because I think he's just a little bit farther ahead right now than Breeze is in the stand-up department. So I am expecting a better version of Breeze than we've seen on tape and all the hype around him and all that. But I still think that Dutra is a pretty tough matchup to make your UFC debut with. And I think that it's in Brazil, so I think Dutra is going to be he's going to have a little bit more motivation to go along with it. So I'm actually going to pick Dutra, because I think that he's just more proven to me at this point. And I know there's a lot of, like I said, hype around Breeze, and he's supposed to get the job done and he's favored for a reason, but I'm expecting this fight to probably hit the scorecards. And if it does, I think Dutra might steal the fight. So my official pick is going to be Dutra to get the win.
Yeah, Dutra had a very unlucky UFC debut where he had Kiichi Kinomoto in big trouble, but then got disqualified due to some illegal blows. Now, against a guy like Tom Breese, as long as he avoids that type of situation, I think he can be in really good shape. He's going to have a significant striking advantage in this fight, and even though he is 10 years older than Breese, I think that he actually is going to be able to use some of that experience to his advantage. Breese, while he is a very highly touted prospect, he really has no experience outside of the UK. He's fought in Bama and Cage Warriors his whole career. So I think going into this fight, I think he's going to be in a bit of a fish out of the water, even though he does train at TriStar. So he hasn't trained there long, so he hasn't really had a chance to develop some of the things that are signature from TriStar, which is great top control, great jabs. Yeah, on the ground he's excellent, but his wrestling is not. So I think Dutra shouldn't have too much of a problem stuffing Breeze's takedowns, and then Dutra's going to have that whole country of Brazil backing him in this fight. So I expect Dutra to be very aggressive on the feet, although not recklessly aggressive. And while Breese does have a very, very good submission game, how is he going to be able to actually be able to pull that off? Because against Dutra, I think it's going to be very difficult for him to get this fight to the canvas. And if Dutra can avoid it, then Dutra's going to be outworking him badly on the feet. Now, conditioning, we don't really know a lot about Dutra's conditioning because his first fight went very short. Maybe Breese could pull something out late if Dutra does start to slow down. Maybe he gets a little too worked up, has an adrenaline dump. But unless Tom Breese gets in top position and starts being able to work that submission game, I think he's going to be in a lot of trouble in this fight. So that's why I'm picking Luiz Dutra as well. Now dropping down to the women's strawweight division, we have Juliana Lima, who is 7-2, taking on UFC newcomer Ericka Almeida, who is 7-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Well, I opened Lima minus 165, the comeback on Almeida, at plus 125. Right now, it's actually minus 210 for Lima. The comeback on Almeida is plus 160. So more action coming in on Lima. I'm sure we're going to see some dog action come back in, though. Again, line's relatively fresh here because Almeida, she's another one of these hyped prospects that's coming into her UFC debut, no doubt about it. She's young. She's 26 years old, obviously from Brazil as well. She is taking this fight on short notice, should mention that. She's replacing Jessica Penne because Penne got obviously the title shot coming up here shortly as well. So stepping in to make her UFC debut against a very solid fighter in Lima. Almeida's background real quick. She has a jiu-jitsu background. Her striking game is really not great, but it gets her by, especially against the level of competition she's fought thus far in Brazil. But I should mention she is the Jungle Fight strawweight champion, so that's pretty impressive. I mean, you don't win that organization's title by being a slouch. On the ground, she is a brown belt in BJJ. And again, she's kind of a pressure fighter. She is aggressive at times, even though her striking is not good. I mean, she has a little bit of power to go along with it, and she could do some damage on the feet for sure. But mainly, she uses her striking to close the gap and go for trip takedowns. That's what she likes to do the best. And then once she gathers you on the ground, she has pretty good ground and pound, and obviously a pretty good submission game to go along with it. Again, 6 of her 7 wins are also by sub, so that's the kind of fighter she is. Now, Lima, on the other hand, she's a very well-rounded fighter. I mean, her wrestling game is, I think, her best attribute, her takedowns and control. Her stand-up game is not really that bad. But that's, again, she's another girl that has a little bit of power on the feet, mixes things up well. She just doesn't overwhelm people with her striking ability, but she is a very complete fighter. She mixes everything up together well enough to win fights. I mean, she outpoints you for sure. She grinds you out a little bit. She's going to have some confidence coming into this bout, because, I mean, she did face, Jacek, now Jacek's obviously the champion in the weight class. She was pretty competitive with her as well, and then has a big win over Ansarov she's coming in off of as well. So Lima has some confidence. I think she's got some momentum on her side as well. And really, if she doesn't get finished, it's her fight to win or lose, in my opinion. Almeida's very dangerous on the ground, even off her back. I mean, she throws up submissions, triangles, arm bars. So Lima could get herself in a problem, and she could get caught in a submission. I wouldn't be shocked if she does, because Almeida's that dangerous, it seems, on the ground. But if Lima's able to avoid the submission game, I think Lima's going to have the overall edge probably on the feet a little bit, but more so of just maybe pinning her up against the cage and just controlling her up against the cage, getting some takedowns where she needs it. And if she doesn't get caught when she's in top position, I think she's going to win the fight by obviously, grinding her out and winning a decision. So I'm going to lean with Lima because I think stylistically, if she doesn't get caught, she wins the fight. But Almeida very well could be a live dog. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if she does finish this fight. So very competitive fight, a very good fight. I'm expecting both of these ladies to perform well, but my official pick is going to be Lima.
Ericka Almeida is a fighter to be excited about. I mean, she was the Jungle Fights strawweight champ, so I expect her to be very aggressive. She is 7 years younger than Juliana Lima, and she is taking this fight on relatively short notice. Basically, Almeida has 1 month's notice for this fight. On the feet, she is very aggressive. She likes to put on a lot of pressure against her opponents, both standing and with punches and knees. So I expect her to do that against Lima, but I don't expect it to work out for her as well because she uses that aggression to get in the clinch and then work for takedowns, whether it's trips or throws or anything. And on the ground, when she's on top, she is a bully. She is very aggressive. She looks to pass. She looks to land ground and pound. And then she hunts for submissions immediately. Now, the problem here is I think Juliana Lima is the better grappler, especially the better wrestler, and she will win scrambles and land in top control for the majority of this fight. So when Almeida closes the distance, when Almeida looks to get the fight to the ground, I think Lima is going to be the one that reverses those positions and she'll get on top. And while Almeida is very good when she is the one that's pushing the pace and being the aggressor and being on top, when she's on bottom, she is way too content to be stuck on her back and work for triangle chokes and other things. And I don't think Lima is going to fall for any of that bait. So I expect Lima to get that top position and then Almeida to be stuck on her back trying to work and be way too active. And it's going to hurt her. On the feet, Lima should be able to hold her own, although I think Almeida is going to be better in the clinch. So I think the best spot for Almeida to win this fight is actually in the clinch because I don't see her getting a lot of top position. Overall, Almeida throws a lot of knees. She is very aggressive on the inside. So that is her method to victory, is to close the distance and then don't let Lima get those takedowns and don't let Lima get on top because that's where I see this fight actually happening for the most part, and I expect Juliana Lima to secure top position for the majority of the 3 rounds and then grind this out, whether it's with punches or with guard passes or submission attempts. Juliana Lima should be the one in control, but I think Almeida has the brighter future, especially with how young she is. So my pick is Juliana Lima. Now kicking off the Fox Sports 1 prelims, we have Mirsad Bektic, who is 9-0, taking on Lucas Martins, who is 15-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Bektic minus 245, the comeback on Martins, plus 175. And again, another spot where it did get bet up. Right now, it's actually Bektic at minus 350, the comeback at plus 250 on Martins as well. So a lot of support coming in on Bektic. I mean, he was the highly touted prospect again, training with American Top Team. And he's performed outstanding. I mean, can't argue what he's accomplished thus far in his UFC career. And even outside of the UFC, you knew that this guy, he was a highly touted prospect for a reason. The guy has abilities in all areas, no doubt about that. He has outstanding wrestling. I mean, if you look at his fight against Skelly, Skelly's known for his wrestling, his grappling, and he was able to out-wrestle Skelly. I mean, that says a lot right there. So, in MMA, his wrestling has really translated great. I mean, he's got explosive takedowns. He's got outstanding overall skill on the feet. He's got power to go along with it. He mixes things up well. He's a smart fighter overall as well. And then, of course, he's got some submissions to go along with it. So there's not really anything that Bektic can't do. And I think that he's definitely one of the best 145-pound prospects in the sport, period. I know he's only had a couple fights thus far in the UFC, but with another win here, it's going to move him farther up the ladder, and people are really going to take notice of this guy. That's why everybody's coming in on him. They realize what kind of talent potential Bektic has, no doubt about it. But that being said, I opened it a little bit lower because you got to be cautious a little bit with Martins. I mean, Martins is a very capable fighter as well. I've never, honestly, I looked at Martins and obviously he's got good striking skill. That's what is the intriguing part of Martins, and that's what kind of made him, pull pull off some victories and get the UFC call as well. But of course, his UFC debut didn't go so well with Barboza, and a lot of that was his strike defense. His strike defense is pretty bad. Even his fight, his second fight with Larson, his strike defense was pretty bad throughout his career thus far. So that's what kind of didn't, the kind of made me get away from Martins, I guess, made me not like him that much, because I think a striker that has terrible strike defense, even though you're good offensively, all it takes is a couple of shots, you're going to be out of there. But I got to give him credit, because his last couple of fights, he's looked a lot better. I know he's floated around weight classes a little bit, but he seems to have settled in at 145. Strike defense has actually improved a little bit, but that chin is still suspect in my opinion, for sure. And that's one major flaw that he's got to work on. And his strike defense, even though it's improving, that's still another flaw that he needs to definitely tighten up a little bit, especially against a guy like Bektic, because even though he's got the complete package, I think that Bektic can do some damage, maybe possibly knock Martins out on the feet, even though Martins excels at striking. That being said, if you look at Martin's fight against Elkins, you could tell he's been putting the work in. I mean, his takedown defense is much improved. I mean, he was very competitive with Elkins. A lot of people would have scored it for him as well. It was one of those back and forth type of fights. Not saying that Elkins didn't deserve to get the nod there, but still, it was, a very competitive fight. And Martins showed a lot. I mean, he showed that he was able to fend off some pretty good wrestlers, grapplers, and he was able to do a little bit of damage. Not enough, obviously, because he didn't get Elkins out of there. But that's the dangerous part about Martins. I think he's very accurate with his punching. He's got underrated power for 145 as well. So he's going to need to probably catch Bektic, though, to win this fight, because I don't see him winning on the scorecards. I think Bektic, again, it's kind of his fight to win or lose. If he doesn't get knocked out by Martins, he's going to win the fight. But the problem with Bektic is he has been rocked in throughout his career as well. If you look back, even before he came to the UFC, he has been dropped or rocked and stunned in fights outside of the UFC as well. And then, of course, the Skelly fight, he did get rocked in that fight, whether legal or illegal, whatever you want to say. He did get noticeably wobbled in that fight. And I think that that's one, maybe it's not fair to call his chin suspect. I don't think that's the case. I think he's pretty tough. And to be able to actually being that rocked and that messed up, being able to finish a fight says a lot for him as well. He's tough as nails for sure, and he's recovered fairly well in most cases when he is rocked. So I think that's the question mark I have behind Bektic a little bit, is Martins has that underrated knockout power and the ability to finish fights on the feet, no doubt about it. And Bektic, in the back of my mind, that kind of sticks out that he has been rocked before. Martins does have enough power. Maybe Martins can get the job done here. But you know what? My head tells me it's going to be Bektic's fight to win or lose, because I don't think Martins is going to get the knockout. And if not, Bektic, again, he should cruise to possibly get a finish in his own right. If not, he's going to cruise to another decision win.
Yeah, and there's a reason that there's so much hype behind Bektic. He is so well-rounded and so technical and so fluid with everything. I mean, you can just tell that he has put in the work, and he is just a natural. The guy is some of the best scrambling and ability to take top position no matter what is happening in the entire UFC roster. I mean, I really like watching this guy. Whenever somebody tries to shoot him for a takedown on him, he turns it around and gets on top. And on the feet, I actually think he's very underrated. He didn't spend a lot of the time on the feet in his last fight, but when it was on the feet, he did rock or drop Paul Redmond both times in the second and third round. I mean, the guy has very good counter-striking ability. He is very technical on the feet as well. I think punch for punch, if he strikes with Martins, he can win this fight. It's just that does increase the risk, because Martins really only is a threat when he's at distance on the feet. That being said, Martin's striking defense is not very good. Like Nick mentioned that Bektic might have a couple issues with his chin, but Martin's chin is terrible and his striking defense is terrible. So I think if Bektic wants, he can get a finish in this fight just by keeping it standing and going for the kill. On the ground, while Martins did display some really good takedown defense, especially against the fence in his last fight against Elkins, Bektic doesn't have just regular wrestling. He has MMA wrestling, where he can use everything. He can transition to all different types of takedowns. I expect Bektic to be able to get this fight to the ground when he wants to against Martins, no matter how much Martins has been working on that takedown D. He is not Darren Elkins. He is not just going to hang on for dear life against the fence and keep trying to get the fight to the canvas. Bektic will transition from single leg to double leg to throws to whatever, to trips. He has the complete package. I mean, there is seriously a reason that this guy is so hyped. He is that good. And training out of American Top Team, he's only going to continue to get better and better every time we see him. When he's in top position, Bektic is stifling. He does not give you any space to work, any space to get back to your feet, and then he is able to batter you with elbows and punches. I mean, he busted up Redmond's face in that first round. I mean, he does some serious damage despite not having a lot of position, and eventually he just wears you down. And that's what I see happening here is either Bektic's going to outwork Martins on the feet and knock him out, or he's going to wear Martins down on the canvas and either win a decision or get a TKO or maybe even a submission. We haven't seen it yet from Bektic. We haven't seen a finish yet from him, but it's coming. This kid is so crazy talented, and I completely agree with Nick that this sky is the limit for him. So I'm picking Mirsad Bektic. I just think that Lucas Martins does not have enough for him other than a puncher's chance. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Nicolas Dalby, who is 13-0, taking on Elizeu Zaleski, who is 14-4. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Up in Dalby, minus 350, the comeback plus 250 on Zaleski. And right now over at 5 dimes, it is Dalby minus 350, still plus 250. Now there has been some movement up and back and forth, I should say. Zaleski was bet early, and then Dalby got some action back. So Dalby is again staying at 350. He's favored for a reason. I mean, Zaleski is actually a pretty talented fighter overall. He's another former jungle fight champion. So again, I just complimented that organization earlier. Outside of the UFC, it's a very solid organization to compete in, and their champions get the call to the UFC for a reason. I mean, they're definitely talented when they do get that call. But Zaleski, he's primarily a striker. He has KO power, in his hands and his feet, really. He's got good footwork, head movement on the feet, mixes striking offense well with his kicks and punches, and then his ground game is okay, but that's also his biggest weakness. So if you get Zaleski on the floor, if he's not in top position, then he has some problems on his back for sure. I mean, he's not the kind of guy that's going to throw up a ton of triangles or armbar attempts and all that stuff, or at least be successful with those. And he has problems kind of scrambling back up to his feet as well. Now, I'm expecting him to be a little bit more improved. I mean, he is training with Cristiano Marcelo in Brazil, so I'm sure that that the ground game is probably a little bit even better than I'm giving him credit for, but that still is his main weakness. Now, on the other hand, with Dalby, I mean, he's definitely a very highly respected prospect coming into this fight. I mean, he's a Cage Warriors welterweight champion, and another organization that you got to respect their champions and their title contenders from that organization. They've produced a lot of solid UFC fighters as well. So he has won the welterweight crown over there, and he's faced decent competition doing so. He's got a karate striking background, but he has really developed his hands pretty well as well. So he's got decent boxing go along with it. He moves well, light on his feet, stays really active. That's what I like about Dalby. Zaleski at times, he is a good striker. He looks to counter strike, and he's very effective doing so. But Dalby's the kind of guy that keeps the pace up the entire fight. And Zaleski tends to get a little bit tentative. He looks to counter strike sometimes too much, and the aggression of Dalby should play into Zaleski's hand if he can counter and knock him out, because Dalby does have a little bit of striking defense issues there. But at the same time, if he doesn't get knocked out, Dalby's going to win this fight on points just with his heavy pressure, I think, on the feet. And Dalby also has some striking ability with power to go along with it. So I think Dalby can be competitive even with a striker like Zaleski. But I think that more than that, I think Dalby's just a little bit better. He's more of the complete fighter. He's also has very solid wrestling. He's got a really nice leg takedown, and his wrestling itself is capable of controlling most fights. He's got good takedown defense. If you look at some of his fights, you should see the balance this guy has when the opponents are trying to take him down. He manages to stay up more times than not. So the most concerning thing about Dalby is definitely his strike defense, but he's tough enough that most times, even when he does get tagged, he's fine, and he just keeps on pushing forward and doesn't really change the outcome of the fight or impact it much. But Zaleski's definitely a guy that you have to respect and you got to watch out for. So hopefully Dalby doesn't get tagged too much. If not, I think he's going to win the fight. I don't see Zaleski taking decision against Dalby. He's going to have to win this fight inside. I think Dalby can win on the cards, and he can also actually possibly finish Zaleski, whether it's on the ground or on the feet as well. So it's Dalby's fight to win or lose. I'm really looking forward to seeing this guy continue his UFC career after he probably gets the W here, because I think at welterweight, if matched properly, he's going to win some fights, no doubt, in the UFC. He's a very talented fighter. So my official pick is going to be Dalby.
And I do think that Dalby should be the favorite here for a reason. Age shouldn't be too much of a factor in either of these guys' UFC debuts. Dalby's 30, Zaleski's 28. Dalby, though, is a very, very dangerous fighter. I think he is one of the better fighters to come out of Denmark. He has a karate background. He's a good striker with both hands and feet, has decent wrestling and an above-average ground game. I really expect that wherever this fight goes, then he should be in control. And if somehow Zaleski is able to control the stand-up, Dalby always has the wrestling and top control and submissions and ground and pound to fall back on. So the well-roundedness of Dalby's game is probably going to be what makes the biggest difference here. My only problem with Dalby is that he doesn't have a lot of punching power, so he's going to have to be throwing a lot of strikes Zaleski's way to try to wear him down. And in doing so, his striking defense is not very good. He does eat a lot of shots. So against a guy like Zaleski, that can be dangerous because Zaleski also is primarily a striker, and he likes to counter. So he'll use a lot of feints and then just try to wait for that perfect moment and then just get in there and blast you. And he is a very good finisher, especially if he gets you hurt. So Dalby needs to be very careful here because if he leaves an opening, if he, leaves himself exposed on a reckless striking attempt, he could get punished because Zaleski will make him pay. Now, Zaleski doesn't have much of a ground game or wrestling ability, but when he does hurt his opponents, he gets on top position and ground and pounds you and gets the finish. So he is not afraid to do that. Now, so the only real thing I'm really worried about is if Dalby screws around too much on the feet, because he does have that solid striking background. So I expect him to do some work on the feet. But if he really wants to win this fight and reduce all the risk, he needs to use that wrestling and the top control and the submissions, because that's where he'll have the biggest advantage here. Because on the feet, it's a bit of a wash, and it might even be leaning towards Zaleski just due to the striking styles with that counter-striking ability and combined with Dalby's defense. So I'm picking Dalby, but you got to be careful about the counter-striking from Zaleski. I'm serious. Watch out for it. If Dalby screws around on the feet, he could get himself knocked out. But my pick overall will be Nicolas Dalby. Now dropping down to the flyweight division, we have Jussier Formiga, who is 17-3, taking on Wilson Reis, who is 19-5. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Formiga minus 135, the comeback on Reis minus 105, and right now over at 5 dimes, it is Formiga minus 155, the comeback on Reis is plus 115. So these lines are relatively new, relatively fresh. It's only been out for about a day or so. So there's going to be, the line margins are going to eventually tighten up a little bit, and a lot more books are going to copy and release their odds as well. So we'll probably see some more movement come into play here. And I think most people are going to side with Formiga, so we could see the line creep up a little bit more. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think, in my opinion, this is a true toss-up fight. I mean, both these guys are very well known for their grappling ability. Their jiu-jitsu is phenomenal. I mean, either guy you can make a case for on the ground against most people. I mean, they're just fantastic. It's hard to sub those guys. It's hard to outposition those guys. I mean, their scrambling ability, everything. These guys are really fun to watch. So they match up relatively well on the ground. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see who gets a true advantage when they really step into cage there. But overall, I expect even a competitive fight on the feet. I think Formiga's got a little bit more power, pure power probably, than Reis, and his stand-up game has improved a little bit. But I think Reis is a little bit busier on the feet. He pushes forward a little bit more. He just has a little bit more of an aggressive pace. Both these guys have been implementing kicks in their game, and they've been a little bit more successful. I actually like Reis's kicking game. He's got a really fast left kick, and he throws it high, mid, low, and he's effective with it at times as well. So I think that Formiga is going to have to be careful with that a little bit. But neither one of these guys have true knockout power. So I think this fight's going to play out like most people. We're going to see it hit the scorecards. And in my opinion, it's going to be a toss-up type of fight. But I'm going to lean a little bit more towards Reis because, again, I think that really, unless Formiga just kind of hangs on his back and does what he does best, I don't think he's going to have that kind of success against Reis. I think that he might try to do that, take his back, but I think Reis is going to scramble out and end up in top position. So I think if it hits the floor, Reis is probably going to be in Formiga's guard most of the time, and Reis is going to win rounds by doing that alone, doing some ground and pound a little bit, looking to pass and possibly get positional dominance over Formiga, which is going to be tough. But with Reis's pace and I think with his ability to scramble out of bad spots, I think it's an interesting and tough matchup for Formiga. A true coin flip, like I said, but I'm slightly leaning towards Reis because of his pace and his ability to just kind of stay away and defend from Formiga's offensive ability as well. So my overall pick is going to be Reis.
Wilson Reis is criminally underrated in my opinion, and I think this is actually a great stylistic matchup for him. You have Reis's biggest problem which has been his striking defense and his chin. And he's facing a guy that has about the least punching power in the entire division. Formiga is pretty much a zero threat in terms of the stand-up department. So Hayes can actually be the one that's the aggressor. He can push the pace. He can throw a few more strikes that he might not normally throw against fighters. And I think that Hayes actually does have a little bit of power, and he can mix it up better than Formiga, as you saw in one of Hayes' last fights where he hurt Scott Jorgensen with a kick to the body before setting up the submission. Formiga, yeah, he did the same thing to Jorgensen, except he knocked him down with a headbutt. So I really don't see Formiga rocking or dropping Wilson Hayes. And on the ground, I think their ground games are a bit of a wash. Formiga is very good with the back control, and when he does get on the ground, I mean, he is incredibly slick when he's in control. But if this fight goes to the ground, I think it's Wilson Hayes initiating it because he is the superior wrestler. He has some very good power double legs, and he's just a very technical, solid top control fighter. And I can definitely see Hayes wanting to steal some rounds late by shooting in and putting Formiga on his back. And I think Formiga can get comfortable on his back. So Hayes could definitely keep him there. And Hayes is very talented Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist in his own right. So he could probably avoid any really bad spots against Formiga. So I actually see Hayes outworking Formiga in every aspect of this fight. And I think we're going to see a bit of an upset here. So my pick is Wilson Hayes. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they're kind of back and forth, but they do, I think, agree with the general trend here. Hayes is the busier guy, and he has used his wrestling more effectively than Formiga. Formiga's big problem, not just that he doesn't have a lot of power, he has 0 knockdowns, but his striking ratio is one of the lowest I've ever seen. He just does not throw a lot of strikes. And that's not good for a flyweight fight, where there should be a lot of action. And, Hayes certainly is going to be throwing more strikes on the feet. Hayes' striking stats aren't that great. I mean, he has been dropped 3 times. His chin rating is terrible and his accuracy is very, very low. But again, being the busier guy is often what wins around here. So Formiga, maybe he's more technical, but he's also been dropped 3 times. And he just does not throw a lot of volume. So, on the ground, again, Hayes' stats are a little bit better. Both guys tend to use a lot of wrestling, but Hayes' stats are definitely better. So I do agree with you here. I think this probably goes the distance. They're both black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I don't think one of them is going to do anything stupid and get caught. At least in a submission, and neither one of these guys is really known for their power. So, while the chins are fragile, not a lot of heat coming. So, I think this probably goes the distance, and Hayes is the busier, more active guy. So, even though some of his stats do look bad, the way it matches up with Formiga, I think does agree with you that he has a good chance to win the rounds.
Now, headlining the preliminary card, we have a featherweight contest between Rony Jason, who is 14-5, and Damon Jackson, who is 9-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Jason -230, the comeback on Jackson +170. And right now it's actually dropped a little bit, but staying ballpark to my opener, where it's actually Rony Jason -210, the comeback on Damon Jackson is +160. So not a lot of action, and so I think it's going to stay relatively close to 2-1. Maybe towards fight time, we could see a line drop, or we could see an increase due to parlays and some straight action coming in on Jason as well. But this fight's very intriguing, no doubt about it. I guess I'll start off with Jackson. First, we know that he's a former legacy fighting champion, featherweight champion, very talented guy. He's coming off a submission loss in his UFC debut to Yancy Medeiros, but that was actually at 155. He took the fight on short notice just to get to the UFC call, and he was a warrior in that fight. He did get submitted by that crazy reverse bulldog choke, whatever it was. I mean, they didn't even know how to really name it. That's how flukish or how crazy that submission was, which you got to credit Medeiros for. That was beautiful, no doubt about it. But that's actually Jackson's best attribute, is his submission game and his grappling and his wrestling. He's a very aggressive grappling-based fighter. Uses his striking basically to close the gap and clinch for takedowns. He's got big, wild looping punches on the feet. Not very technical, but throws with intent. So he's definitely dangerous, and you got to be cautious because he does throw a little wide and wild at times. So, but overall, it's his takedown game that's effective and it's pretty good. I mean, his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and sub game overall, he's only a purple belt in BJJ, but he's beyond that. I mean, he could beat a lot of black belts. So you got to take that for what it's worth. I think, as far as the stand-up game or his effectiveness, I think his clinch game is actually okay as well. He can land some knees, and he's got decent fight IQ at least when he's working the clinch. So I think he's going to keep on getting better now that he, made his official UFC debut, even though it wasn't successful. I'm expecting some better things, especially since he dropped down to 145. On the mat, this guy's going to be very difficult for most 145ers to deal with. I mean, Jackson's pretty big for the weight class. He's going to be strong. And again, he's just persistent with his takedown game, and he's pretty effective doing so. I mean, if you look at it, even before he came to the UFC, people can say what they want, but he just dominated. I mean, he beat Leonard Garcia in a minute 30. Now, take it for what it's worth. I know a lot of people aren't respecting Leonard Garcia that much these days, but still, how many people really beat Leonard Garcia in a minute and a half? Not too many out there. So that tells you how dominant this guy could really be on the ground. Now, that being said, he's facing a very game opponent in Hunted Jason. I mean, Jason is a very well-rounded fighter in his own right. He is a BJJ black belt, has a 6 submission game, but not just that. I mean, he has some power and technique on the feet as well. And again, he can knock you out with his hands or his feet. He's got power in both. He's got good timing with his knee attack as well. It's fun to watch him strike when he wants to be aggressive, at least. Sometimes he's a bit tentative as well, and that could get him some into some problems depending on the opponent. I think you should be okay here, though, against Jackson on the feet, no doubt about it. But Jason, the scary thing with him is you get him. Even if you do get him on the ground, I mean, he's very dangerous off his back. He looks for submissions, quick and fast triangles, arm bars, scrambling ability is not bad as well. So he can finish the fight anywhere it takes place. So stylistically, you look at this fight, you think, okay, Jason's the better striker. He probably has a better jiu-jitsu overall as far as submission danger goes. The only real advantage Jackson would have in this fight is probably his wrestling. And does Jackson really want to take it to the floor where he could possibly get submitted, even if he's in top position? That's a question mark, and I think that's why Jason has to be favored in this fight. But that being said, you know what? I think if Jason does not submit Jackson, he's probably going to lose this fight, even though it is in Brazil. And I still think that Jackson can get the takedown, and make no mistake, he will get the takedown at some point. It's probably going to come pretty early as well. And if he's able to not get caught in an armbar, not get triangle, not get reversed or swept or get himself in a bad spot, he's going to win this fight by control. I think he's going to be aggressive enough on the feet again, maybe a little sloppy, but he might eat a couple punches. He's got to be careful there. But I mean, he showed some toughness even in the Medeiros fight. He absorbed some punishment, got rocked a little bit, but he stayed with it and was persistent with his takedown game. I think he's going to have more success against Jason in that department. And once he gets him to the floor, Jackson's pretty good. I mean, he doesn't really just settle for position. He's constantly moving to improve position, tries to take your back, and submit you. Now, it's going to be hard to finish Jason because of his jiu-jitsu game as well. So I think more than anything else, we're probably going to see Jackson just kind of grind Jason out as the fight goes on. I don't think he's going to get caught by submission. So if he doesn't, he's going to win the fight. So I'm going to pick Jackson. I know he's a big underdog, but I think that this is a winnable fight. He's going to have a little bit of size, pure size advantage over Jason as well. Not pure reach, actually. Jason's going to have 2 inches of reach on the feet, but I still think that, I mean, as far as physicality goes, Jackson's going to have advantages there as well. So I think he can get the job done with his wrestling, and as long as he's cautious and not get subbed. So that's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to go with Jackson to pull off the upset here.
And while I do think it's a possibility that Jackson could win, I'm going to go on the safe side and pick Jason. Jason is the better overall striker, and I do think that Jason can outwork Jackson on the feet, and I think Jason does have as good, if not a better, ground game as well. The biggest thing that Jackson has, as Nick mentioned, is he has a bit of a height advantage, so he's going to have a little bit of leverage, and then he does have the superior wrestling. Now, Jackson was the legacy champion when he came over to the UFC, but the legacy guys have not done very well traditionally in the UFC compared to some of the other promotions that have sent some of their champions over. So I don't think that that'll be as much of a help, although Jackson did get some good experience in there against some tough guys. Now, I'm not going to completely discredit Jackson because in his UFC debut, he lost quickly, but it was at lightweight, and it was against a pretty good fighter in Yancy Medeiros. So I think that he's getting a little bit too much discredit because of the fight against a bigger, stronger guy in another weight class. So this is going to be a more down to his level, although it's still a very tough fight for making your featherweight debut in the UFC. I mean, Rony Jason won the featherweight season of Ultimate Fighter Brazil 1 for a reason. So I think Jason's going to give him a lot of trouble, especially in the stand-up department and potentially in the submission department. The thing that does give Jackson a shot here is in Jason's last fight, when he got hurt, or not in his last fight, but in that fight against Robbie Peralta, he actually was losing some of the scrambles and he did get stuck on his back. So that is something that you have to be concerned about because Jason does not have the best scrambling ability. So I think in this fight, Jackson does have the potential to get top position and lay on Jason for up to 3 rounds. I mean, it really could happen. He might even be able to submit Jason, although Jason's never truly been submitted in a fight. I think he got stomped once in Brazil, but those aren't legal in the unified rules. Now, Jason is going to be a threat everywhere else, but wrestling is really, really important. So I'm slightly leaning Jason, but I do think that Damon Jackson is a live dog. So I'm probably at like the 45% range, if not more. So I'm going to pick Rony Jason, but very, very little confidence in him. Now kicking off the Fox Sports 1 main card, we have Wendell Oliveira, who is 24-8, taking on Darren Till, who is 12-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight? And how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Oliveira minus 135, the comeback on Till minus 105. And right now it's Oliveira minus 120, even money. So line margins just basically tighten up a little bit. It is a 20-cent line setting compared to the 40-cent line setting that opened. So not a ton of action coming in, honestly, either way. Just a little bit of two-way action on this fight. And it is a tough one to call. I mean, these guys match up relatively well. About a pick-em fight, and that's what you're seeing here as far as the line goes as well. Oliveira is the older fighter. He's 31 years old. Till's only 22 years old. I guess I'll start off with Till first for those of you guys that don't know much about him. Before I really got into his footage and studying for this card on Till, I thought he was honestly going to be maybe a BJJ guy. I didn't really look at his resume, didn't know much about him, to be honest with you, but surprisingly I found that he's actually a striker, and he's a pretty good striker to go along with it. I mean, he's another one of these guys that's a very highly touted young undefeated young prospect. Again, he's a striker. He's actually from the UK but training out of Brazil, I believe, and he's a very good southpaw striker, excels at his kickboxing game, loves to throw a lot of strong kicks, low, middle, high, and he's very effective with it. His hands are okay, but still not really up to the level of his kicking game overall. So he still needs a little bit of work on his boxing, but that's going to get better as well. So he has a very kick-heavy attack, and he can be effective with it, the way he goes about it. He moves around well on the feet, and again, he kind of uses for – he doesn't utilize that jab enough for being a long, rangy type of fighter, but he uses his feet well enough that he makes up for that. He tends to be a little bit too patient, though, at times on the as far as standing up goes. Lets his opponent push the pace from time to time, and that causes some problems because you can definitely lose on points in a situation like that, and especially with Oliveira and a guy that actually has better boxing. I'll get into him in a second here, but overall, I think Till is a pretty quality talented prospect. Again, he's got to work on his overall game, but the one thing that's noticeable about him that I do like about him, I mean, he's a striking-based fighter, has a little bit of a ground game, has a little bit of BJJing along with it, but he's got pretty solid takedown defense and a good sprawl as well, so it's not easy to get this guy on the floor. So he can basically keep the fight where he wants it at most times. Now, heading over to Oliveira, basically we all know Oliveira is a very aggressive fighter. He's a bit tentative though at times too, so I know that kind of contradicts itself, but when he throws, I mean, he goes at it. He throws in combinations and he throws very aggressive and effective, has explosive power. But at times he just, again, will sit and wait a little bit, and he's a little bit too patient, and he lets people kind of dictate the pace at times as well. I don't think that's going to be the case against Till. I think Oliveira is obviously going to come out here and looking to redeem himself, really, because it was unfortunate. I mean, his knockout loss to Ponzinibbio, it wasn't a big surprise, but how quick it came about definitely was. And that's one category or one thing that you got to kind of take notice with Oliveira. He has been KO'd 3 times throughout his career, and he's coming off of a quick knockout loss to Ponzinibbio as well. So if Till does catch him, especially with the kick, it's very possible that Till could knock him out. But overall, if he doesn't get caught, I think it is kind of Oliveira's fight to win or lose here. I think, again, he's got really solid boxing, so he's going to be able to – he's got decent kicking game as well, but I think he's going to be able to counter Till's attack with his hands, and he's going to be a little bit more effective. I think he can outpoint Till because Till does kind of get tentative at times, a little bit more so than Oliveira. So I think his hands are going to be the effective factor here, and I think he's going to be the one pushing the pace a little bit. I think he's going to be able to control up against the cage when they're up against the cage and clinching like that as well. So it's a very tough fight. I mean, I've been kind of going back and forth on this fight, who I really like, because it is a pick'em type of fight for a reason. So it's not an easy fight to call, but I really do think that Oliveira's experience, and I think his overall MMA game is just a little bit further again along than Till. So I'm going to lean slightly towards Oliveira. This is one of those situations that I will look at the weigh-ins and see how decent these guys look, if they made weight okay, and if there's anything noticeable that's wrong, and I might switch my pick. But as of right now, I'm honestly leaning a little bit more towards Oliveira to get the W.
And this fight's a bit tricky because both guys are stand-up fighters. Till is making his UFC debut. He's only 22 years old, out of the UK, but he actually trains out of Brazil. He's primarily a Muay Thai kickboxer. I think he has really good power in both his hands and his feet. Ground game is a bit of a question mark, and the biggest concern in this fight for me is the fact that he's taking it on short notice with only about 10 days to prepare. Wendell Oliveira was supposed to take on TJ Waldberger, but Waldberger had to pull out of the fight. Now, Oliveira, on the other hand, there's really not that much to be impressed about with him. I mean, he made his UFC debut against Ponzinibbio and got slaughtered, so you really didn't get to learn too much in that fight. And then overall, he is a pretty decent striker. He's aggressive. He has more of a boxing game than Till. So I think that this fight is probably going to stay standing for the majority of it. And Oliveira is a bit older, and he does not have a great chin. So if Till connects with something solid, he could knock him out. The problem is both guys have a bit of a counter-striking game, so this one could slow down to a crawl almost, with neither guy wanting to be the one to initiate the action. So I could definitely see Oliveira trying to push the pace a little bit, but neither guy really wanting to commit. So the big thing here is, from distance, Till should have the advantage because he has some pretty good kicks, and he is a little bit longer and taller. So I'm going to give the slight advantage to Darren Till. I think this fight's going to be close, but I think that if there is a knockout in this fight, it is going to be Darren Till that scores it. So my pick is Darren Till. Now dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Francisco Trinaldo, who is 16-4, taking on Norman Parke, who is 21-3-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Parke minus 170 to come back on Trinaldo, plus 130, and it was immediately bet up. Right now, it's Parke minus 230. The comeback on Trinaldo is plus 190. So more support, more action coming in on Parke. And you know what? It's another spot where I think Trinaldo is the better mixed martial artist overall, but I do think that Parke, if it hits the scorecards, to make a long story short, it's going to be Parke's fight to win or lose, honestly. So if he doesn't get finished inside, which Parke is a pretty tough dude, I do think that he's probably going to win the fight, even if it is in Brazil. So I can understand, again, the early action coming in on Parke. It's just tough because Trinaldo, I mean, he's getting a little bit older. He's 36 years old now. His cardio has been an issue at times as well, and Parke's just a little bit more steady. I think he's a little bit more active at times. He's the younger, fresher fighter, so those advantages definitely go to Parke. He's looked actually pretty good. I mean, he's fought some quality competition, especially in his last fight against Thiago, and he was close. I mean, a lot of people could have scored it for Parke in that fight as well. That's how close he was to winning that fight. But since he's entered the UFC, I think Parke's been getting better fight by fight, getting more confidence as well. So Trinaldo, even though he's dangerous and he's the more complete mixed martial artist, I do think that Parke is probably going to be able to weather the storm a little bit. Trinaldo has a lot, I think, more pure knockout power than Parke does. And then, of course, in the submission game, I think Trinaldo is a little bit more dangerous as well. But I think Parke is game enough to, again, to kind of neutralize him if it does hit the ground and not get subbed. I think Parke is good enough to push a higher pace on the feet. And his pure boxing might be a little bit better than Trinaldo's as well. Again, Trinaldo might have more of a knockout punch, but I think Parke keeps that steady pressure on that wins him rounds, honestly. Now, if the fight hits the floor, I do think that Parke's takedown defense is better too. So I think he's going to be the one ending up in top position, especially as the fight goes on. Trinaldo typically tends to fade a little bit, but his cardio has looked a little bit better as well. So we got to give him some credit there. He's been putting in the work. He's been looking better. But unfortunately for him, I mean, he's not getting any younger. And Parke, again, his confidence is climbing all the time. He's getting better fight by fight. So I do think it's Parke's fight to win or lose. So the early action on Parke I can understand, and I'm going to pick him as well. I think that Parke, more times than not, he doesn't get caught in anything. He should win a decision. So Parke's my pick.
Yeah, and looking at this fight, to me, it comes down to whether or not Francisco Trinaldo can get something going early. As we all know, Trinaldo's conditioning is not great. It has improved throughout his UFC career, but he's also getting older. So I think it's going to become less of a big deal here as it goes on. Now, Norman Parke is a very solid overall fighter. He's well-rounded. He mixes it up. He has, I think, the better overall striking technique and pace against Trinaldo. But Trinaldo is more dangerous in terms of one-punch power. Trinaldo has some heavy body kicks. Trinaldo has some nasty left hooks. So Parke is going to have to be careful. But I don't think it's going to be too much of a problem. Trinaldo is not exactly the most explosive guy, so Parke should be able to avoid any major big power shots. And I think what's going to happen here is Trinaldo's going to give him his best shot early, and it's not going to work. And then you're going to see Norman Parke in control for the majority of the bout. I think Parke will be able to move around the cage pretty well. He is a very long fighter, even though Trinaldo is a thick and very strong lightweight. Parke should be the quicker fighter. He should have the better conditioning. I think in terms of wrestling, it's a bit of a wash, maybe even Parke being the better wrestler, although I don't see this fight going to the ground that often. And what is probably going to happen here is Parke is going to be able to land because his striking defense is much better than Trinaldo's. Trinaldo, being older, just doesn't have the reflexes that I think Parke has. So what you're going to see is Parke is going to be getting in, getting out, landing some good shots. Trinaldo will be swinging at air. So that's pretty much how I expect this fight to go. And I think it's probably going to be another solid Norman Parke decision. So Norman Parke is my pick. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I think they support the basic theme here that Trinaldo does have a good puncher's chance. He's a strong guy. He has a high knockdown rate, and he's actually fairly accurate. But Norman Parke is just a much busier fighter. He's in and out. He's got better defense. We haven't really seen him hurt. He's never been knocked down. So, even if he does eat one, he probably survives early on. And he's also used his wrestling much more effectively. He attempts more takedowns. He's not great at converting, but he eventually gets it there. He has good takedown defense, and he's spent much more time in control on the ground compared to Trinaldo. So, both guys southpaws. There's a pretty big age gap that favors Parke. So I do see enough things lining up in favor of Parke. You don't want to count out Trinaldo. He's certainly a dangerous fighter, and does have a lot of power for the lightweight division, but Parke is, I just see him being much more active, sticking through it, really pushing the pace for all 3 rounds and probably getting a decision.
Now moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have Francimar Barroso, who is 16-4, taking on Ryan Jimmo, who is 19-4. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up in Jimmo, minus 245, the comeback on Barroso, plus 175. And it's another spot where Jimmo has increased a little bit. He's minus 270 right now. The comeback on Barroso is plus 230. A tough fight, really, because both these guys honestly match up relatively well. They're both very similar in a lot of ways. I think that Jimmo does have the advantage in this fight overall. I know he's been training now at Power MMA. Both of these guys are very decent strikers. I mean, that's where they mainly like to keep the fight and work their striking game. But I'm saying that because Jimmo has kind of that karate type of style. He's got underrated power to go along with it. He's another guy that does get tentative at times a little bit, and you can kind of clinch up and hold him up against the cage. His takedown defense is pretty good though as well, but I don't think he's going to have to worry about too much of that with Barroso. I think that what's going to come into play here is really who is the aggressor and who's cardio, who's going to come in better shape, and whose game plan is going to be a little bit better because they are both so similar. I do think that Jimmo can be the more effective striker. I mean, he's got to watch out because Barroso definitely has a little bit of power, but I think Barroso tends to slow down a little bit more so than Jimmo as the fight goes on. And I think as far as neutralizing each other out here, I think if the fight does hit the floor, I expect to see Jimmo on top a little bit more. I mean, like I said, he's been working with the power MMA guys. You know, those guys are mainly, I mean, they're a well-rounded camp, but they focus a lot on the wrestling as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Jimmo kind of shooting in and taking Barroso down. Now, Barroso's takedown defense overall is pretty solid, but I mean, he has been taken down, and it is a way that Jimmo can definitely win this fight. Now, Barroso, again, he's a very explosive fighter. His slow pace does bother me at times, though. I think Barroso, I mean, if he just had, his cardio was just a little bit better, I think he would be that much better in his UFC career. I mean, he's had a couple competitive fights, no doubt about it, and he just hasn't been overly impressive in my opinion. I mean, his loss over Stringer, I mean, again, the judges could have seen that one, either way there. I think the Stringer did deserve to get that nod. But, I mean, if you look at Stringer now, he hasn't looked too great either. So he's on that basic level. I think Jimmo's just a level above him. And I think that Jimmo, regardless of where this fight takes place, I think Jimmo's just a little bit better than him. I think, if you look at it pure jiu-jitsu wise, Barroso does have an advantage for sure, with his BJJ. I just don't think he's going to get Jimmo in a bad spot on the ground. So I think that's the only clear cut, way he's better. Barroso, I mean, that's the only real advantage he has is pure jiu-jitsu. I think the striking is close. Both of them can be effective and dangerous, but I think the wrestling is close as well, but I do favor Jimmo a little bit in that. So jiu-jitsu is probably the only way Barroso is going to win this fight, or if he hits the scorecards, of course, it is in Brazil. It's going to be a competitive fight. Maybe he gets a controversial decision. So it's a tough fight to honestly bet. But as far as a pure pick, I do lean a little bit more towards Jimmo as well because, like I said, I think he just has more overall advantages in this fight. But I'm expecting a very close competitive fight that could realistically end up going either way.
Francimar Barroso probably needs to get this fight to the ground. Now, he isn't a great wrestler, but he does have a pretty good overall ground game. And on the feet, Barroso basically can throw some good leg kicks, but he doesn't pack a ton of power in his punches, and I don't think that he can hurt Jimmo. So if this stays standing, I expect Jimmo to outwork him. Jimmo has a little bit more power. Jimmo is a little bit more well-rounded. And I think Jimmo will definitely be able to score him in terms of the judges. On the ground, Jimmo has had a couple fights now where he's been in a bit of trouble. I mean, you look at the James Tahuna fight where Jimmo almost scored a knockout and then spent 2.5 rounds on his back. Or the Oven St. Preux fight where Jimmo got stuck on his back and then, he broke his arm. So I think there are some definite possibilities here for Barroso to get top position. If he really, really works for it and commits to it, he could get Jimmo down. That being said, I think Jimmo probably is the better wrestler of the two. And if Barroso does try those takedown attempts, Jimmo is either going to stuff them or he might even get in top position. Although, again, I think Jimmo just wants to avoid the ground against this guy completely. Overall, I do favor Ryan Jimmo. There are a couple concerns with Jimmo. He has been voicing his opinion pretty loudly against the UFC. So they're not doing him any favors by sending him to Brazil to take on a Brazilian, even if he is the favorite in this fight. And he has been injured twice now in 2 separate UFC fights. So that is something to think about. I mean, the guy just can get hurt randomly in a fight, and that would completely swing the fight towards the opponent. So you can't 100% trust Ryan Jimmo either, because there is a possibility that he just gets injured in this fight, and then Barroso is able to capitalize, or Jimmo just forces a doctor TKO. So I think that Jimmo is going to win. I am going to pick him, but I think you got to be a little cautious. Now dropping down to the welterweight division, we have KJ Nunes, who is 12-6 with 1 no contest, taking on Alex Oliveira, who is 10-1 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Nunes minus 125, the comeback on Oliveira minus 115, and the line has since flipped. It is currently, it's not that much of movement, but it currently actually Oliveira minus 130, the comeback on Nunes is plus 110. So it did flip. More support early coming in on Oliveira. I was a little surprised. I know that Oliveira was a very big dog against Gilbert Burns in his UFC debut. He did take that fight on short notice, and that fight was at 155. And I mean, Gilbert Burns is one of the most respected young, again, prospects out there. He's just a total package. So Oliveira really did way better than we all thought he would do. And that showed a lot. So that's why he is getting some respect now, I think, in this spot as well, because it's his striking that looks phenomenal in the Burns fight. I mean, the guy had good takedown defense, and I mean, he's got that kind of striking game that's very effective. I mean, he mixes everything up well. He's dangerous with his hands or his feet. He's got length to go with it on the feet. So on the feet, I mean, he is a force to be reckoned with for sure. And he's got decent enough takedown defense that in most cases, you're not going to get the guy to the floor either. So he's just a tough out. And of course, we all know about KJ Noons. I mean, he's been around the sport for a while as well. He's a very solid fighter. I have a lot of respect for KJ Noons. I think he's really elevated his game recently as well. He's been training hard. He wants to prove to everybody that he can definitely win some fights in the UFC against the best of the best. And he's been doing pretty well at it, honestly, overall. So I think that, Noons is obviously a striking based fighter as well. He's been throughout his whole career, but he's really improved his ground game. I mean, he's hard to take down. Talk about takedown defense with Oliveira. Noons has very good takedown defense as well. Now his submission game for either one of these guys, really, the submission game, they don't go for subs. They don't go for many takedowns either. So, this is a striker versus striker type of contest. So, it's going to be a fun fight. But that's what makes it competitive and almost a pick'em type of line, because it realistically could go either way. Now, the funny thing is here, Oliveira is taking this fight once again on short notice. He's placing Jan Cabral. That's who Noons was originally supposed to fight. So Noons goes from fighting a guy that is going to come at you and try to take you down and grapple you and submit you to a guy that's going to want to take your head off. So it's a big change. And also in the weight class, I mean, the fight with Jan Cabral was originally supposed to take place at 155, and this fight now against Oliveira is at 170. So Noons is going to be content with that. I mean, he had a fight with Sam Stout recently at 170 as well, so that's not going to be a big problem for him. And Oliveira, I'm sure, I mean, he's had plenty of fights at 170, and I'm sure he's going to be happy not to cut the extra weight as well. So this fight works out well across the board for the fans and for, the fighters themselves, because they're both going to want to stand and bang, and they're both going to be happy about not cutting the additional weight here. But getting to the matchup, man, it's tough. I really could see this fight, another fight that really could go either way. I mean, Noons has enough knockout power in the feet that he could, if he lands clean, he can knock anybody out. I mean, and usually the lightweight division, but even at 170, I mean, that's where he ended up catching and knocking Stout out. So Noons has a ton of power. He's got a ton of experience. He's faced a lot of long fighters in the past. So Oliveira, even though he's got some length on the feet, I don't think Noons is going to be it's not going to be too much of a change for him. I mean, he's going to be able to adapt as the fight goes and probably be successful in his own right. But that being said, I do think that gives Oliveira some advantages in this fight. I think Oliveira could be the more effective striker. I think that, he's going to be a little bit more active. I mean, Noons tends to wait sometimes and counterpunch as well. He does like to push forward some, but Oliveira is a very aggressive striker, as we've seen, and he's a very effective striker doing so. And even though I said that Noons has faced longer fighters before, he has struggled with some of those longer fighters that he's faced. So I think that's going to be kind of the same thing. So Noons isn't going to be really out of his element too bad, but I think Oliveira is going to be a very tough fight for Noons to win. So I'm slightly leaning towards Oliveira and this what should be a great fight, because I think that he's just a little bit of a better pure striker, to be honest with you. And I don't think this fight's going to hit the floor too much. If it does, I wouldn't be surprised to see Oliveira actually in top position if it does hit the ground at all. Because even though his, defensively his wrestling and takedown defense was good, I think offensively he's probably has an edge over Noons as well. So a tough one, that another fight that I've been going kind of back and forth on, but I am leaning a little bit more towards Oliveira, and it's not going to hurt the fact that this fight is in Brazil, although he is taking this fight on short notice. So my official pick as of right now is going to be Oliveira, but it's a close competitive fight that I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, and this fight is a bit crazy. It was supposed to be a lightweight contest, and then with Alex Oliveira taking the fight on short notice, about 11 days to get prepared for the fight, it's now taking place at welterweight, which actually might benefit KJ Noons, even though Oliveira won't have to do a full weight cut. Noons actually has plenty of experience at welterweight, and he's actually performed pretty well, including one time a random welterweight fight in the UFC against Sam Stout, where he scored a vicious knockout. So I think Noons will come in with a full training camp and then just not have to cut as much weight. I think he'll be in decent shape here. That being said, Alex Oliveira is a very, very dangerous striker. He has great kicks, great punches, great elbows, great knees. His Muay Thai is very dangerous. He did gas in his last fight against Gilbert Burns. He slowed down in that third round, and Gilbert Burns was able to take advantage. Gilbert Burns is an elite ground fighter and then was able to get the submission. I don't think he'll gas as badly, even though he is taking this fight on short notice. Again, I wish this guy would just give himself a full training camp, but I don't think he'll gas as bad because, again, this fight is at welterweight. He's going to be slightly longer, slightly taller than KJ Noons, The boxing should relatively be a wash. KJ Noons does have that great background as a professional boxer. We all know about it. And his biggest issue has been against good wrestlers, good ground fighters, or really diverse strikers like Nick Diaz. While Noons had a great first fight against him, the second time through, Nick Diaz pretty much worked him over and just outpaced him. And Alex Oliveira could do that because he can mix it up pretty well. So I expect this fight to be very fun, very competitive, and it probably should stay on its feet for almost the entire fight. And I'm going to favor Oliveira. He is a slightly younger, less battle-worn type of fighter. And again, he is fighting in his home country of Brazil. So I think this fight's going to be very interesting and very exciting. But I think Alex Oliveira is able to outwork KJ Noons and then mix it up just enough to keep Noons guessing. And that's really the biggest thing here, is because KJ Noons does not keep you guessing. You know what he's going to do. He's going to box. And if Alex Oliveira is able to throw in a few twists in the stand-up department, I think that could be enough to help him get over the top. And who knows, he could end up winning just a controversial judge's decision because it is in Brazil and the crowd's going to be behind him. So overall, my pick is going to be a slight lean toward Alex Oliveira. Now dropping down to the featherweight division for the co-main event of the evening, we have Nick Lentz, who is 27-6-2 with 1 no contest, taking on Charles Oliveira, who is 19-4 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I open Oliveira minus 210, the comeback on Lentz plus 160, and right now it's Oliveira getting the action. It's minus 270, and the comeback is plus 230, so more support coming in on Oliveira. This is a phenomenal fight. This is a great fight at 145 for sure because both guys are so talented. I think both of them have really at 145 have looked pretty good overall, especially in my opinion, Lentz has looked really good. I mean, much better weight class for him than 155. His grappling, his grinding style, his pace, just everything for Lentz has been clicking at 145. He even was a lot more competitive than most people thought against Chad Mendes too. And then, in my opinion, his best win at 145 has come against Hacker Diaz. Diaz is a phenomenal grappler, grinder in his own right, and he was able to outgrind the man in that department as well. So Lentz has a lot of good qualities about him. Now, of course, he's in for a heck of a fight with Oliveira because, I mean, if you look back at their fight when they first fought at 155, Oliveira was obviously dominating that fight before the stoppage due to illegal knee or whatever that Oliveira threw there. He was definitely getting the better of Lentz in every aspect of the game. So I think a lot of people are looking back at that fight and thinking that it's going to happen again, and it could very well. Oliveira is another very talented fighter, and he only gets better and better and more confident as he progresses his UFC career. No doubt about that. His win over Stevens was very impressive recently. I mean, Stevens is always a tough out. In my opinion, one of the hardest guys to fight at 145, and he looked great in that fight. His submission win over Hioki is one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. I mean, especially 145, because who submits Hioki? I mean, that was the first submission loss for Hioki, so that tells you a lot. I mean, Oliveira, offensively, his jiu-jitsu skill is off the charts. I mean, he could even though Lentz, he has pretty good submission defense overall, and he has good grappling. I mean, Oliveira can definitely finish Lentz by submission. I wouldn't be shocked at all. Whoever Oliveira faces, if he finishes on the ground, not surprised. That's how good this guy's jiu-jitsu is. Now, defensively, he does have some holes in his game as far as jiu-jitsu goes, but I don't think he's going to have to worry too much about that with Lentz. Lentz is going to want to take this fight to the floor, in my opinion. He's going to have, try to maybe have some success on the feet against Oliveira as well, but I think he's going to try to grind out Oliveira. And he might have a little bit of success, I think. So this is a lot closer than I think a lot of people out there are giving this fight credit for, because I think Lentz at 145, again, he's looked great. And I think that his grappling, his grinding ability could make life miserable for Oliveira if he doesn't get caught. Because like I just mentioned, Oliveira could definitely finish most with his submission skill. And on the feet, I think it's going to be pretty close, but Oliveira might have an edge there as well. So it is Oliveira's fight to win or lose. I think he's the more dangerous fighter. He's more capable of finishing the fight. So if it ends inside, it's probably going to be Oliveira, the one that finishes the fight. But if he hits the scorecards, I think it's going to be really close. And I could see Lentz pulling out a controversial or close type of decision, maybe a split decision as well. So in my opinion, this is a dog or pass situation. It's hard to lay the juice against Lentz in this weight class, especially for this matchup at least, even though Oliveira had success against him in the first fight. I'm expecting a really competitive fight here, and I am going to pick Oliveira though, because again, he's just got a little bit more tools to win this fight, and he's a more capable finisher. But if he hits a scorecard, it's going to be scary. My pick is Oliveira.
And I'm going to agree. The main reason I like Oliveira is not just because he looked good in the last fight that they had where he was in control and then had the illegal knee. The reason I like him is actually his most recent performance against Jeremy Stephens. I mean, that was a fight that a lot of people thought that if it just stayed standing, Stephens was going to dominate. But Oliveira was actually in control for most of the stand-up portion of that fight. And yeah, he did get it to the ground and he was in great positions on the ground and almost submitted a few times. But it was the stand-up portion, the improvement in his overall striking that has actually led me to think that he's a legit threat in the featherweight division. I think on the feet, Oliveira is definitely the longer fighter. He has a better pace. I think his striking has improved enough that he's going to be able to outwork Nick Lentz on the feet. And then on the ground, yes, Nick Lentz is one of the best wrestlers in the entire division, but Oliveira isn't scared of those type of fighters. I mean, heck, in his UFC debut, I mean, he destroyed Darren Elkins on the ground in 40 seconds. So I think it's not too big of a threat for him against a guy like Nick Lentz. I think Nick Lentz could get some takedowns. It's a very real possibility, but Oliveira is so tricky on the ground. He is constantly not just throwing submissions at you, but chaining them together. The second you defend one, you're defending another one. He looks for sweeps. He is just one of the most active ground fighters I've ever seen in any weight class. And I think he's going to keep Nick Lentz on the defensive. And even if he is on his back, he could win a round that way, just from constantly transitioning to kimuras and arm bars and leg locks and triangle chokes. There's always going to be that threat when Charles Oliveira is in a fight. I mean, as Nick mentioned, Hatsuhioki getting submitted was unbelievable because it just had never happened. And Charles Oliveira has that ability. So Nick Lentz is going to be a live dog. He is a gritty, tough guy. I mean, he won the third round against a sick Chad Mendes. So you know that he's going to be bringing it. But I am very concerned that in this fight, he doesn't have a lot of methods to victory other than getting the takedown and just smothering top control. And I don't think he'll be able to do that without constantly being on the defensive. So I'm going to pick Charles Oliveira. I think he controls the stand-up, and I think he controls the action on the ground, even if he is on bottom position. So Charles Oliveira is my pick. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I agree with you, Brian. I think Oliveira is the more technical and just the superior fighter all around, with the exception of the grinding pace that Lentz can put on. Lentz is willing to walk forward. He's willing to eat a lot of punches, but he throws a lot of volume, and he is extremely busy with his takedown attempts. He has 137 takedown attempts in his time in the UFC. He is basically attempting them at 3 times the usual rate of anybody else. So not necessarily a great takedown accuracy, but if you just keep doing it, you're eventually going to find yourself in top control. And that is the risk here. However, Oliveira's submission game is an interesting counter to that point. Oliveira attempts submissions at 3 to 4 times the baseline rate as well. So he is very busy with the submissions, although he has spent a lot of time on his back. So that's the risk here. Oliveira, I think he's the longer striker. He's more accurate. He has better defense, and he appears to be more resilient, at least a little bit in terms of the chin rating. So he could land the better combinations or the cleaner shots. However, Lentz being busier, that's a risk. If it's on the ground, same thing. Oliveira is certainly a better finishing threat, and obviously the more technically interesting and superior fighter on the mat, but Lentz does have that stifling style. So agree with you here. Listen, Oliveira is, I think, the better mixed martial artist, but he is at risk specifically because of Lentz's style, that he's a grinder. And so that always allows Lentz to stay in the fight. So I would definitely lean Oliveira, but if it goes to the cards, there's a risk that he could lose on pace.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now this brings us to the main event of the evening in the welterweight division. We have Carlos Condit, who is 29-8, taking on Thiago Alves, who is 26-9. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Condit minus 190, the comeback on Alves plus 150, and right now it's minus 250 for Condit, Alves plus 210, and the line hasn't been out for a while, so a lot of action back and forth on this fight with more of it coming in on Condit. Not that surprising. I think Condit, especially right now, he's a more popular fighter. I mean, the last couple years here, he's really come on strong, and his ability, I mean, as far as fighting ability goes, his popularity, I mean, he's the type of guy that has a little bit of everything in mixed martial arts. He's got that appeal to the average fan. Just across the board fights like a warrior. I mean, much respect for Condit, and I think the people are agreeing. And as far as matchups go, this is interesting because obviously Condit's going to be the longer fighter here. He's going to be, he's making his return. I should mention that right away. He's been out for a while. That's one scary thing though. And I think a lot of people can't wait for him to get back in the mix because he hasn't fought since March of last year in his TKO leg kick loss to Woodley. So a lot of people can't wait for Condit to get back in there. He was definitely on his way to possibly getting a title shot as well. The guy's such a well-rounded mixed martial artist. He's just a tough out, and I think he's really peaking at this point of his career. I mean, he's 31 years old. He's been around for a long time, but I think this is the best Condit that we've seen. Now, again, with his injuries, I'm not sure exactly how he's going to come back and how he's going to look. None of us are really, but from all indications with everything that I'm hearing from training camp and from everything that we've seen, Condit looks to be in great shape and it looks to be, back in form, but we'll see how it plays out. Now, Alves, on the other hand, you can say a lot of the same things about him. He's only 31 years old, but he is beyond that in fight years as well. He's had a lot of wars throughout his career, and he's been tremendous. I mean, he was at the top of the food chain, got that title shot at 170 for a reason, because the guy is just a quality overall fighter. Now, of course, his main effectiveness is his striking ability. The guy has a tremendous amount of knockout power. In my opinion, I mean, looking back through his career, there hasn't been a spot where really he's been dominated on the feet by anybody. He's usually the one that's been pushing the higher pace, has the more effective striking. Now, in his last fight against Mian, though, that wasn't the case, though. He did get lit up early in that fight, no doubt about that. He was losing that fight, and he came back with that nasty body kick to win that fight. If not, if he would have hit the scorecards, or he was actually close to getting finished himself. So Mian was on his way to beating him and outstriking him as well. But you don't really typically see that against Alves. Alves is usually the one out pointing people or out, or KOing people, we should say. So Alves is a force to be reckoned with on the feet. His takedown defense is so legit that it's hard to get him to the ground. You have to be basically elite level wrestler to accomplish that. And Condit doesn't really have that. So I think the fight probably stays standing. Condit is going to have like 5 or 6 inches of pure reach on the feet. Condit's a heck of a striker as well. He's developed some nice knockout power, especially as of late. So he could do some effective damage to Alves on the feet. I wouldn't be surprised at all, because Alves was, again, against Mian, getting clipped pretty good there as well. But I wouldn't necessarily count Alves out, though, on the feet. I think Alves is going to be the one pushing forward a little bit more, and we're going to see Condit using angles and maybe throwing a little bit more, and being pretty accurate as well. But this is going to be a close fight. I think it's, again, a dog or pass situation, because I'm expecting this, if it does hit the scorecards, it's going to be really close, a lot closer than people are really assuming, I think. But if there is a finish, I think you got to lean a little bit more towards Condit. Alves does tend to make mistakes. If the fight does hit the ground, in a scramble or any situation like that, Alves is definitely capable of being submitted. That's how he's lost several fights before as well. So Condit has the better jiu-jitsu game, has the better submission ability. And again, I think he could do a little bit more damage with his length on the feet and his counter-striking ability as well. So I'm going to pick Condit, but it's definitely a dog or pass situation, because I think people are underestimating Alves a little bit. And if this fight does play out like I think it will for the most part on the feet, Alves is definitely going to be game.
And I do expect Alves to be game. I mean, the guy earned a title shot a long time ago for UFC 100 for a reason. I mean, he was a monster in the welterweight division. Most notably are his leg kicks. I mean, this is a guy that, other than maybe Edson Barboza, has some of the most dangerous and powerful leg kicks in the entire UFC roster. He tears people's legs up. And a tall, lanky fighter like Carlos Condit could definitely have a big bullseye on those legs, especially that surgically repaired knee. And that's another factor that you have to take into this equation is Condit's been out for a very long time. He got injured in that Tyron Woodley fight, and this is his first fight back, and it's a headlining 5-round bout against a really dangerous welterweight in Thiago Alves. Now, the good thing for Condit is Alves has been very rusty. He has not fought very often over the last few years. He is starting to work his way back, and with a 5-round fight, Condit definitely has the advantage because he's fought them before. He was the UFC interim welterweight champion for a brief amount of time. He's fought multiple 5-round fights in the last few years. Alves' only 5-round fight in the UFC was when he fought George St. Pierre and lost a 5-round decision. So I expect Carlos Condit to be the aggressor, to be able to push the pace, to have the cardio on his side, because that has always been one of his biggest strengths. Now, in terms of chin strength, I think Condit has better recovery. Neither guy has ever been truly knocked out. I mean, Alves did get TKO'd by John Fitch on the ground in one of his early UFC fights, and Condit technically has a TKO in his last fight after the doctor stoppage to the knee. But overall, I think both guys have good chins, good recovery, but they're also both very battle-worn and battle-tested with nearly 40 fights each between them. So I expect this fight to be just a dog fight in the stand-up department. Condit is the longer fighter, taller and longer, so he's going to be able to land from further away, but he's not a guy that really picks people apart with the jab and uses his length. He's more of a guy that likes to be on the outside and then step in and land some big shots. Also, I think Alves is the more technical striker, although Condit is a lot more unpredictable. He throws a lot of crazy combinations. He has a really good combination where he'll mix in a 1-2 and then a head kick. If Alves isn't paying attention, that could knock his block off. So he needs to be very careful, especially when Condit starts throwing strikes together, because Condit mixes it up very well. Now, in the clinch, I expect Alves to be very strong. He has good elbows, good knees, and just being so compact, he can pack a little bit more power up close. At distance, that's where Condit probably can thrive, just because he does mix it up so well. And on the ground, I think Condit has the better overall submission game, although Alves probably is a little bit of a better wrestler. So Alves could shoot in for takedowns in this fight, although I think they'd be ill-advised because he has been submitted multiple times in his career. Condit has a very dangerous ground game, and it's not like he's facing George St. Pierre here, who is so technically sound with his submission defense. Alves could get tapped out if this fight goes for the canvas. So overall, I'm favoring Carlos Condit, but there are some intangibles that are making me a little scared here, especially with that long layoff and the knee injury. So I'm picking Condit, but not crazy confident about it. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, there are a lot of specifics to this matchup that you guys pointed out, and the numbers do back those up. So let's start at the top. First of all, power. Thiago Alves has 11 career knockdowns in the UFC. That is a lot. He's actually not far off from being in the record books. And on a per strike basis, his power is higher than Condit's. But when it comes to technical striking, as you mentioned, Brian, Alves is more accurate and he has better defense and he has a better chin. So all three of those things line up favorably. The part where he is not able to control the fight is his range and pace. He's not a big welterweight. Condit is a rangy welterweight. Condit has the advantage on stand-up. When he's moving back, as we saw against Nick Diaz, he's throwing combinations. Punch, finish with a head kick, finish with a low kick. He's just very busy. He's throwing a lot. Now you mentioned Thiago Alves' leg kicks. 22% of his standing strikes are aimed at the legs. That's more than twice the normal rate. So he does like to throw those leg kicks, and that could be an issue because that came into play against Carlos Condit last time, where he injured himself probably on a takedown, but then got finished off with leg kick. So that's an issue. He might be a little bit gun shy, not wanting to eat a lot of those kicks that could alter his strategy. But Thiago Alves, just all around, he is a very game striker, very dangerous. And then on the ground, neither one of these guys attempts a lot of takedowns. I mean, a fraction of the normal average rate. They've been in the UFC a long time, WEC before that. And yet they only have, a dozen or two takedowns between them, attempts between them. So not a lot of initiating, to get on the ground. And so overall, that basically neither one of these guys has actually controlled their opponents more often than they've been put on their back. So I don't really expect the ground game to get involved here. However, you do have to be careful with the submissions from Carlos Condit. He does have a good submission game. He's lanky. That allows him to get those arms and chokes in there, his legs. So Condit is more efficient, overall effectiveness. He tends to do more damage than he receives. He's pretty well rounded. He's got good defense. Alves is very dangerous with his power. For 5 rounds, I don't know if Alves can really keep it up that well with a guy like Condit. I think Condit could press the pace, and so overall, I can understand why Condit is the favorite here. But the power of Alves, the technical striking of Alves is a serious threat here. It does make him a very live underdog. So I agree with you. I think the line movement already is getting a little too far for Condit. He's a justifiable favorite, but not a big one.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 67. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday night following the weigh-ins, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMA Oddsbreaker Premium member. If you'd like to become a premium member, just go to MMAoddsbreaker.com and you can sign up in the top right corner of our homepage. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAoddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there, so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsors, 5 Dimes and Countermove. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.